My parents invited me to Christmas dinner and casually announced over dessert, "We've decided your brother will be moving into your apartment for the next 2 years." My brother snickered and said, "You can crash on our couch like a guest." I just nodded and kept eating. They had no idea that 3 weeks ago, I'd already signed the papers for a place they couldn't afford to step foot in. I, 32M, sat at the dinner table that Christmas evening, fork in hand, watching the candlelight flicker across faces I'd known my whole life, but barely recognized anymore. The turkey was dry, the conversation forced, and the tension thick enough to cut. But I kept my expression neutral, chewing slowly, waiting for the inevitable. They always had something planned, always had some new way to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. It came during dessert, just as I'd expected. Mom brought out the pie, setting it down with that particular smile she reserved for announcements. Dad cleared his throat in that theatrical way of his, and my younger brother leaned back in his chair with a smug grin already spreading across his face. I took another bite of pumpkin pie and waited. Mom started by saying how wonderful it was to have everyone together, how family was the most important thing, how we always supported each other. The preamble was predictable. Then she got to the point. They'd been thinking, she said, and they'd come to a decision about living arrangements. My brother had been struggling financially after his third failed business venture, and he needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet. They'd decided he would be moving into my apartment for the next 2 years. Not asking. Decided. I set my fork down carefully and looked at her. She continued without missing a beat, explaining how it made the most sense since I had that extra bedroom I wasn't using anyway, and family helped family. Dad nodded along, adding that it was temporary, just until my brother got established. 2 years wasn't that long, he said. I could make the sacrifice. My brother couldn't contain himself. He leaned forward with that same entitled smirk he'd worn since childhood and told me I could crash on the couch like a guest if I wanted. His eyes gleamed with the kind of satisfaction that came from knowing Mom and Dad would always choose him, always bail him out, always make me the solution to his problems. I nodded slowly and took another bite of pie. The thing was, they had no idea. 3 weeks ago, I'd signed the papers on a penthouse downtown, something they couldn't afford to step foot in even if they pooled every penny they had. But I wasn't about to tell them that. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. This wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the one who studied hard and stayed out of trouble while my brother partied and coasted through life on charm and our parents' endless forgiveness. When he wrecked Dad's car at 17, they bought him a new one and made me share mine with him. When he dropped out of college after one semester, they threw him a gap-year trip to Europe funded by the college fund they'd promised would be split equally between us. When I graduated with honors and got my first apartment, they gave him the key and told me he'd be staying weekends because his dorm was too loud. The pattern was carved in stone. He took, I gave. He failed. They cushioned. I succeeded. They expected more. After college, I'd worked 80-hour weeks in finance, climbing from analyst to associate to VP in 7 years. I'd sacrificed relationships, weekends, sleep, everything to build something they never acknowledged. Meanwhile, my brother had cycled through a food truck business that lasted for months, a cryptocurrency venture that tanked spectacularly, and most recently, a boutique coffee roastery that closed after 6 weeks because he couldn't be bothered to show up consistently. Each failure came with the same script. Mom would call me in tears, asking how I could be so heartless as to not help family. Dad would give me the disappointed speech about remembering where I came from. My brother would show up at my door with boxes and that expectant look, already knowing I'd cave. Except this time, I hadn't caved. This time, I'd planned ahead. 3 weeks before Christmas, I'd walk through the penthouse for the final time before signing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble countertops, a master suite bigger than my entire current apartment, building amenities that included a concierge, gym, rooftop pool, and private parking. The kind of place that required proof of income 3 times the annual rent and references from people who mattered. I'd qualified without breaking a sweat. I'd been planning the move for months, quietly, telling no one. I'd hired movers for the day after Christmas, scheduled utilities transfers, changed my mailing address. Everything was arranged. The current apartment lease was up January 1st, perfect timing. I'd already given my notice to the landlord weeks ago, but my family didn't know any of that. They still saw me as the same compliant son who'd spent his whole life accommodating their golden child. Dinner continued. They talked about the logistics of my brother moving in, how he'd take the bedroom, and I could use the couch, or maybe get an air mattress for the corner. Mom suggested I might need to adjust my schedule since he liked to have friends over on weekends and needed his space. Dad mentioned I should probably start moving my stuff into storage to make room. I listened and nodded and finished my pie. My brother asked if I had any beer in the fridge at the apartment because he wanted to stock up before moving in. He talked about repainting the bedroom, maybe knocking down that bookshelf to make room for his equipment. Mom thought that sounded wonderful, really making the space his own. I asked if anyone wanted coffee. Mom said that would be lovely. In the kitchen, making coffee, I felt calm. Calmer than I'd felt in years. There was something clarifying about reaching the end of something, about knowing exactly how the next few days would unfold. I'd spent so long being angry, resentful, bitter about the unfairness of it all. But now, standing there listening to them plan out their takeover of an apartment I no longer owned any stake in, I just felt detached. Done. Coffee served, we moved to the living room. They continued talking about the move, about how good it would be for my brother to have stability, how I'd understand someday when I was more mature. I was 32. My brother was 28. But in their eyes, I'd always be the supporting character in his story. Around 10, I said my goodbyes. Mom hugged me and reminded me to clear out my dresser before the move. Dad patted my shoulder and told me this was what family did. My brother told me not to worry about cleaning. He'd just throw out whatever I left behind. I drove home to my current apartment, walked through the rooms I'd lived in for 4 years, and felt nothing but relief that I'd never have to come back. The next morning, December 26th, the movers arrived at 8 a.m. Professional, efficient, they had everything packed and loaded within 4 hours. I supervised, checked items off my list, made sure nothing was left behind except the furniture that had come with the place. By noon, everything I owned was on its way to the penthouse. I did one final walkthrough of the empty apartment, dropped the keys in the landlord's mailbox as arranged, and drove across town to my new place. The movers were already unloading when I arrived. The concierge greeted me by name, handed me my key cards, explained the building systems. I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor and walked into my penthouse, my name on the deed, my space, my life. It took the rest of the day to unpack and arrange everything. By evening, I was settled in, standing at those floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights come on, and I felt something I hadn't felt in my family's presence in over a decade. Peace. I knew the calls would come soon. I turned off my phone and enjoyed the silence. The next morning, I turned my phone back on to find 37 missed calls and 23 text messages. I made coffee, sat down at my new kitchen island, and started reading. The first messages were from my brother, confused. He'd shown up at the old apartment with his stuff and found it empty. He'd tried the key Mom had apparently stolen from my keyring at Christmas dinner, but it didn't work because I'd changed the locks 2 weeks prior as part of move-out protocol. He demanded to know where I was. Then Mom's messages started. Where was I? Why wasn't I answering? This wasn't funny. My brother needed to move in today. She'd called the landlord who informed her the lease had ended and the previous tenant had moved out. She demanded an explanation. Dad's messages were more controlled, but had the same thread of panic. He wanted to know what was going on, where I'd moved, why I hadn't discussed this with the family. He said we needed to talk immediately. I finished my coffee and replied to the group chat they'd started. I told them I'd moved, that the lease on the old apartment had expired as planned, and that I was settled into my new place. I didn't offer the address. My phone rang immediately. Mom. I answered. She was crying, asking how I could do this. Didn't I understand my brother needed that apartment? What was he supposed to do now? Why was I being so selfish? I let her finish and calmly explained that my lease had ended. I'd given proper notice as required, and I'd moved to a new place that better suited my needs. She demanded the address so my brother could move in with me instead. I told her no. The silence on the other end was profound. In our entire relationship, I'd never flatly refused her anything. She stammered, asking what I meant by no. I explained that my new place was mine, I lived alone, and I wasn't taking roommates. She shifted tactics. She said I was being cruel, that family helped family, that I was abandoning my brother when he needed me most. I asked her when exactly she planned to stop enabling his failures. That didn't go over well. Dad got on the phone. He tried the disappointed father routine, telling me this wasn't how he raised me, that I was supposed to be the mature one. I asked him why maturity only seemed to mean sacrifice when it came to me. Why did being responsible mean I had to fix everyone else's irresponsibility? He said that wasn't fair. I said 32 years of being the backup plan wasn't fair either. My brother grabbed the phone and started yelling, calling me selfish, saying I'd sabotaged him on purpose, that I'd planned this to screw him over. I asked him when he planned to take responsibility for his own life instead of expecting me to provide for him. He hung up. The calls continued throughout the day. Angry, pleading, guilt-tripping, threatening. I answered some and let others go to voicemail. My position didn't change. I'd moved, I wasn't sharing my new place, and my brother would need to figure out his own housing situation. By evening, extended family started getting involved. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to were calling to tell me I was being unreasonable, that family helped each other, that I should reconsider. I asked each of them if they'd be willing to house my brother for 2 years. None of them took me up on it. The next few days were more of the same. Mom tried bargaining, offering to pay me rent for my brother, not understanding or perhaps refusing to acknowledge that money wasn't the issue. Dad tried logic, laying out all the reasons why this made sense, conveniently ignoring all the reasons it had made sense for me to be taken advantage of for 3 decades. My brother found the building somehow, showed up in the lobby demanding to see me. The concierge called up. I told him I wasn't expecting visitors and to have the person removed. Security escorted my brother out. He left furious messages about how I thought I was better than everyone now, how my fancy building and my money had changed me. He was right about one thing. I had changed. I'd finally learned that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since Christmas dinner, and the fallout has been even more dramatic than I expected. After my brother was removed from the building lobby, things escalated in ways I should have anticipated but somehow didn't. First, my parents tried showing up together. The concierge called. I declined the visit. They waited in the lobby for 3 hours before security finally told them to leave. Mom left crying, according to the very professional but slightly apologetic concierge who'd had to deal with the scene. Then came the social media campaign. My brother posted a long rant about how I'd betrayed him, abandoned family, and let success corrupt me. He left out the part about expecting to take over my apartment without asking. Several relatives commented with support for him. A few cousins I actually respected reached out privately to ask for my side. I gave them the condensed version. Their tune changed quickly. My aunt, Dad's sister, called me directly. She'd apparently heard the full story from one of those cousins and wanted to say she understood completely. She told me something I'd never known. My parents had pulled similar stunts with my other uncle years ago, always expecting him to bail out Dad's bad investments and my brother's early disasters. He'd eventually moved across the country to get away from it. Suddenly, some family history made a lot more sense. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into a new project, stayed late, avoided personal calls. My boss noticed the extra effort and pulled me aside to say a promotion was coming my way, VP to senior VP, significant raise, corner office. The timing felt like cosmic validation. Meanwhile, my brother's housing situation apparently became desperate. He'd been couch surfing with friends, burning through goodwill quickly based on the frustrated subposts from people in his social circle. Mom kept calling, begging me to reconsider, just for a few months, just until he found something. I held firm. Dad tried a different approach. He called and asked to meet for lunch, just the two of us, neutral territory. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a cafe downtown. He showed up looking older than I remembered, tired. We ordered, made small talk about work and weather, dancing around the obvious. Finally, he got to it. He said he understood I was upset, that maybe they'd overstepped. Maybe, as if there was any question. He said my brother was struggling, really struggling, and couldn't I find it in my heart to help just this once. I pointed out it had never been just once. It had been a lifetime of once that added up to me being the perpetual solution to problems I didn't create. He got quiet. Then he said something that surprised me. He admitted they'd relied on me too much over the years, that they'd taken advantage of my reliability. He said they'd always thought I was fine, that I didn't need the same support because I was capable. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from him. I asked him if he understood that capability didn't mean I should be exploited. He nodded slowly. I asked if he grasped that helping someone meant supporting them, not enabling them to avoid consequences. He looked into his coffee and didn't answer. I told him I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was trying to live my own life, make my own choices, stop being the backup plan. He asked what they were supposed to do about my brother. I said that was their problem to solve, not mine. For once, they needed to let him face reality instead of cushioning every fall with my resources. We parted without resolution, but without hostility. It wasn't closure, but it was something. The promotion came through officially. Senior VP, ridiculous salary increase, stock options, the works. I celebrated alone in my penthouse with expensive whiskey and the satisfaction of knowing I'd earned every bit of it without family help or connections. My brother finally found a place, a studio apartment in a rough part of town, sharing with a roommate. Mom called to tell me about it, her voice heavy with reproach, as if his downgrade was my fault. I asked her when she planned to hold him accountable for his own choices. She hung up. The invitations to family events stopped coming. I wasn't surprised. In their eyes, I'd violated the unspoken contract. I was supposed to be the responsible one who sacrificed. Choosing myself made me the villain. Fine. I'd rather be the villain in their story than the martyr in mine. Update 2. 6 months have passed since Christmas, and my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined that night I sat nodding over pumpkin pie. The promotion at work opened doors I'd been working toward for years. I'm leading major accounts now, traveling internationally, building a reputation that's mine alone. My professional network has expanded exponentially. I've been approached by headhunters from 3 different firms offering even better positions. I'm not taking them yet, but it's good to know my worth in the market. The penthouse has become more than just a living space. It's proof that I can build something for myself, that my value isn't tied to being useful to people who take without appreciation. I've furnished it exactly how I want, hung art that speaks to me, created a home that reflects who I am rather than who my family expected me to be. Socially, things have shifted too. Without the constant drain of family obligations and crisis management, I've had time to rebuild friendships I'd neglected and develop new ones. I joined a gym in my building, started attending networking events, even began dating someone I met through work connections. Nothing serious yet, but it's nice to have space in my life for possibilities. As for my family, we've settled into a cold peace. We're not estranged exactly, but we're not close. Mom sends occasional texts that I respond to politely, but briefly. Dad called on my birthday. We had a stilted 10-minute conversation. My brother and I haven't spoken directly since the lobby incident. I heard through the family grapevine that he's still in that studio apartment, still struggling, but actually working a steady job for the first time in years. Apparently, being forced to face real consequences without a safety net has been educational. Who knew? The extended family drama has mostly died down. Some relatives still think I'm heartless. Others have quietly reached out to say they respect my decision. A few have even admitted they wish they'd set boundaries with their own family members years ago. I've thought a lot about that Christmas dinner, about the moment they announced their decision so casually, so confident I'd comply. The old me would have argued, gotten upset, maybe even given in eventually. But something had shifted before I even sat down at that table. I'd already signed the papers on my new place. I'd already made the choice to prioritize myself. That's the thing they never understood. It wasn't a punishment or revenge, though I know that's how they saw it. It was simply me deciding that my life, my resources, my space, and my peace mattered as much as anyone else's comfort. After 32 years of being expected to absorb everyone else's problems, I chose differently. The penthouse windows overlook the city, and sometimes late at night, I stand there thinking about parallel versions of my life. The one where I said yes that Christmas, where I'm sleeping on a couch in my own apartment while my brother takes my bedroom, where I'm still making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's refusal to grow up, where I'm still waiting for appreciation that would never come. I don't regret the path I chose. Not for a second. My parents raised me to be responsible, reliable, self-sufficient. They succeeded. They just never considered that those qualities might eventually lead me to build a life they couldn't access, a success they couldn't claim credit for, boundaries they couldn't cross. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own diminishment. I'm done being the solution to problems I didn't create. I'm done sacrificing my happiness for people who wouldn't do the same. I'm done feeling guilty for choosing myself. That Christmas dinner was the end of one version of my life and the beginning of another. They had no idea I'd already signed the papers. They had no idea I was already gone. And honestly, that's exactly how it needed to be.